Hello everyone, welcome to today's Link Senior webinar. We'll get started in about 4 minutes. Hello everyone, welcome to today's Link Senior webinar. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Link Senior webinar. My name is Megan McMahon, and I am the Research Director here at Link Senior. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Today's webinar is providing one free NAB, NCAP, and NCC-DP CEU credit. To be eligible for the CEU credits today, you must stay on the webinar for the full hour. The Zoom meeting room will track how long you remain in the room and will send that as a digital report to me. We are unfortunately not able to provide CEUs to people who join only by phone. At the end of the webinar, I will provide the required post-webinar survey evaluation link in the webinar room chat box, and I will also send it by a constant contact email message. So please be sure to check your email spam folder. You must fill out that survey no later than midnight this Thursday, December 19th, to be eligible for the CEU credit. And if you're not looking for CEU credit today, we do still want to hear your feedback. So please go ahead and fill out the survey as well. The CEU certificates will be issued on Monday, December 23rd next week by email. So please, again, check your spam folder. As you know, Link Senior started providing monthly educational webinars last year, and we have had more than 6,000 people participate since that time. At the end of today's webinar, I will be sharing a list of upcoming speakers for 2020 so that you can save the date. And this is just a look at some of our past speakers and also the positive feedback from webinar participants. Again, we're always looking for new ideas on webinar topics and potential speakers. So if you have an idea, please email your thoughts and suggestions to us so we can include that for next year. Link Senior currently has more than 300 clients in the United States and Canada. Here's a snapshot of some of our current partners, supporters, and the number of residents we currently serve. These are some of the results of our most recent research study, which took place at 3 long-term care and memory care communities in Toronto. The results show that being highly engaged in recreational activity is associated with increased cognitive functioning and social engagement, as well as decreased aggression and antipsychotic medication use. This work we did was funded by the Baycrest-led Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation. Our evidence-based research results were published in September in the Seniors Housing and Care Journal. We are very proud of this work and our contribution to advancing the field of resident engagement. Today, we will be discussing person-centered approaches to dementia care, and we are truly thrilled to welcome Kirsten Jacobs as our guest speaker. Kirsten is the Director of Dementia and Wellness Education at Leading Age. Kirsten is on the education team at Leading Age. Leading Age is a national association of elder-serving organizations. And in her current role, Kirsten leads the Dementia and Wellness Education Strategy for Leading Age. Before we begin today, I wanted to cover the need for resident engagement. Many of you joining us are working with older adults every single day, whether that is in enrichment or wellness. An important aspect of the care we provide can be tied back to the emerging research on the impact of social determinants of health. One really exciting aspect of this concept is that it shows that throughout the healthcare journey, it is actually just 1/3 of outcomes that are determined by health behaviors. And the remaining 2/3 of health outcomes can actually be attributed to social and environmental factors in a person's life. And this means that resident engagement has a huge opportunity to positively influence quality of life. In fact, this quote from Abraham Maslow highlights just how important it is to give every resident the opportunity to have meaningful engagement that allows them to be who they are, no matter their current needs or their changing preferences. So at Link Senior, we have created a framework based on 3 questions that you may want to consider using in your own work. Are we engaging everyone? We say we are going to engage residents in a personal way, but there is still a struggle to do so. So once the residents are engaged, is that engagement based on their needs and preferences? Finally, are we thinking about tracking well-being and tracking outcomes? Of course, it's also important to remember that there are certainly challenges that are facing activity and life enrichment staff today. Communities can be understaffed, families may not visit their loved ones very often, and medication is still being used unnecessarily rather than focusing on evidence-based, non-pharmaceutical strategies. This slide shows the sad statistics of minutes of engagement today and how they remain low across settings. But remember, this does provide an opportunity for us in the engagement field to be even more committed to providing meaningful and purposeful engagement opportunities every single day. And this slide is a visual example of the fact that we do have a process, and each part of this cycle in the engagement field is critical to achieving this person-centered care that we aim for. Eventually, we can get to a point where we can prescribe resident engagement as an effective way to recognize each resident's needs and provide them with purposeful engagement. Now, once we understand the workflow, we can see that there are tools better than paper out there that can help us promote meaningful resident engagement. So with that, what I'm going to do now is hand over control of the slides to Kirsten and let her take it from here. Kirsten, go ahead.
Thank you, Megan. What a treat. And thanks to Charles and to Megan for the invitation and behind the scenes coordination, which happened well in advance of our gathering today. Big appreciation to all of you. It's fun to see you streaming into the room and sharing your greetings via the chat box. I'm really aware that this is a very busy time of year, so it's truly a gift that you're spending this hour with us today. So before we dive in, I must acknowledge the challenging and important work you all do every day. Webinar formats don't really allow for you all to share your expertise in the way I would like to invite, but I want to acknowledge I know you possess it. So here's my plan for our virtual time together. I'll start by sharing a little bit about myself and about leading age, not because I love talking about myself, but rather because I think it's useful to understand my vantage point, just as your personal experiences inform how you do your job every day. Next, I'll share a framework for thinking about working with people living with dementia. Through my work at Leading Age, I've come to believe 4 different lenses can inform the way we design housing, services, supports, and programs for people living with dementia. Then I'll share some examples of different types of approaches, ranging from programs, tools, and organizations. It's my hope that at the end of the webinar, you walk away with at least one new idea or a new way of thinking. Then I'll allow some time for questions. So as promised, I'll start with brief personal context. As so many in this field, and I suspect as some of you, I landed here because of personal experience. By the end of my junior year in college, I was preparing to graduate with a major in arts administration and a minor in studio art from a college in Southern California. I was filling my spare minutes with dance and orchestra. I had a plan, and it was to work in a museum or gallery after I graduated. But as plans go, that summer, my grandpa, who had been my grandmother's care partner, was admitted to the ICU. Suddenly, our little family's world was turned upside down. My grandpa was seriously ill, and my grandma, who was in the early stages of dementia, was sad and scared. My parents, sister, and I spent the summer in Nebraska, away from our home in Portland, Oregon, to triage the crisis. That August, when I returned to college after many weeks of caregiving, arts administration just didn't feel as relevant as it had 3 months earlier. My thesis project morphed into an arts education unit for residents of a nearby nursing home, and my first job after college was in an assisted living community. 19 plus years later, and my grandparents have all died, but their legacy still informs my entire mindset about older adult services. I share that because I suspect you all have personal stories about older adults in your lives as well. I believe those stories and the people in those stories should remain the foundation on which we build all our work. After spending a number of years in senior living management in Oregon, I moved to Washington, D.C. and started working for the organization now called Leading Age. Leading Age is a national not-for-profit association. The mission of Leading Age is to be the trusted voice for aging in America. Our 6,000 plus members and partners include not-for-profit organizations representing the entire field of older adult services, 39 state partners, hundreds of businesses, consumer groups, foundations, and research partners. And I see many of you are leading age members on the call. Leading Age is focused on education, advocacy, and applied research. The Leading Age Board of Directors adopted this bold vision a number of years ago. Since then, we have been striving to interrupt ageism in all aspects of our work. I bring it up because I believe it applies to our work related to dementia, and I'll explain that to you shortly. So let's start our exploration of the topic of person-centeredness and culture change by asking you to take a moment to ask yourselves this question: what is home? What are the smells, the feelings, the images, the ideas, the memories that you associate with home? You can jot them down or use the chat box to share your responses. Family, comfort, smells, food, a place of security, the smell of cooking, music, safety, photos of my loved ones, pets, desserts, baking, games, base camp from which to explore the world, laughter, backyard, comfortable things, plants, pets, loved ones, quality of life, choice, blankets, music, photos. Oh, these are beautiful descriptions. When I ask myself that question, I think of a feeling, like many of you, a place and people. For me, home is a comfortable place, which I saw from many of you, where I can be myself. The space is personalized, and I also associate good food and time with friends and family. I invite you to hold on to those thoughts as I describe the culture change movement in a few minutes. So now let's shift our thinking and take a minute to ponder your first experiences and assumptions about nursing homes. What are those sights and smells and sounds that you envision or even remember from your early experiences? Again, you're welcome to use the chat box. Sick old people, long hallways, wheelchairs, caroling, yes. Strong smell of urine, sterile, funny, offensive smells, sterile, sadness, sleeping people, heads hung over, dark environment, lots of smells, yeah. Shiny, silence, smell, linoleum, sterile. I've seen sterile a lot, that medical smell. Residents being parked, a mauve color, yes, that pinkish mauve color we all remember. Not like home, someone said. People bossing me around. Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Perhaps like some of you, my first memories of a nursing home are of my childhood self performing with my dance and violin classes. I was one of those kiddos who was paraded around through the nursing home corridors, you know the ones, in hopes of brightening the lives of those who lived there. I remember what you all described, vacant looks on the faces of some of the older adults. And I remember that hospital-like space with that mauve color. The hallways were very long and the lighting was harsh. I often felt a little bit scared of both the people and the place. And as you all referenced, I think we can conjure that smell that I recall from those days of tap dancing on those linoleum floors. Now that was about 30 plus years ago, and fortunately, the older adult services field has made a lot of changes, but there's a long way to go. I took these pictures at different organizations over the past 10 years. While the organizations at which I took these pictures do a lot of things really well, there's lots of artifacts of institutions in those images. About the time my childhood self was performing in nursing homes, a grassroots movement to radically change long-term care was just emerging. You all know that movement. It was dubbed the culture change movement, and it refers from that shift away from what we just described, so away from the medical model of care or a more hospital-like model of care. So rather than designing spaces and days to accommodate the needs of an institution, nursing home environments and schedules, or even lack of schedules, are designed to support the lives of those who live there and work there. The terms culture change, person-centered care, person-directed care, and relationship-centered care all refer to that transformation from a medical model to a more home-like model. While they all have slightly different meaning, they are referring to that same movement, so I'll use the terms interchangeably. As you know, one of the fundamental goals of culture change is to create home for people wherever they live. I want to invite you to read the definition in front of you to yourself. It was developed by the Pioneer Network, who was formed in 1997 to advocate for person-directed care. I'll give you a moment to read it. To me, this is one of the most salient parts of that definition. So let's continue our conversation by starting to build the framework I referenced earlier. We'll start with person-directedness or person-centeredness. While the culture change movement initially focused on nursing home settings, it now recognizes that a person-directed culture is important in any setting. And in any setting, including a home, you can have the trappings of an institution. From culture change, we've learned to literally put the person first when describing individuals. We say things like person with a disability, person with dementia, rather than describing the individual by their circumstance, like demented person. People come first. With this shift in thinking, we also emphasize the value of home over institution. So people live in communities or homes versus facilities. We refer to individuals versus beds. 100 people live in our nursing home rather than we have a 100-bed nursing home. And nobody is labeled by their needs with terms like feeder. Since today we're talking specifically about person-centered dementia care, I want to briefly share some information about dementia. For many of you, this is likely a very quick review. As you know, the term dementia refers to symptoms typically characterized by a loss of cognitive and intellectual ability, impairment in memory, and brain changes affecting areas such as language, reasoning, and judgment. And those changes are severe enough to interfere with daily functioning. Dementia can be caused by many conditions, the most common of which is Alzheimer's disease. And that's why we so often hear the terms Alzheimer's and dementia used interchangeably. But Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. According to the Alzheimer's Association's 2019 facts and figures, 1 in 10 people age 65 and older have Alzheimer's dementia. While the numbers are certainly significant, it's really impossible for us to quantify the social and emotional impact on individual lives. That said, I believe it's really important to balance the need to raise awareness around a challenging and costly disease with the needs of individuals currently living with dementia and those soon to be diagnosed. Even without a cure, people with dementia continue to learn, celebrate, engage, and participate in life. That's where we all come in, right? We can focus on utilizing and developing constructive tools for improving dementia services on behalf of those currently living with the disease and their family members. I think it's really important for us to not get sucked into the crisis narrative that we all so often hear. While the fundamentals of person-centered care are the same regardless of age, regardless of diagnosis, physical or cognitive ability of the elders, person-centered dementia care requires an extra layer of thoughtfulness. In a person-centered environment, dementia is considered just one aspect of the individual. Care is relationship-based and acknowledges the individuality of people with dementia. And the focus is on the person versus the diagnosis. Person-centered dementia care is focused on interdependence, well-being, and empowerment of both the people with dementia and those who love and care for them. At the core of those values is the idea of personhood. Tom Kitwood's book, Dementia Reconsidered, which is likely familiar to many of you, describes personhood as a status that is sacred and unique to each human being, and also relational between human beings. So the goal of person-centered dementia care is to maintain personhood regardless of mental and physical changes. Person-centered dementia care asserts that all humans deserve respect and can live fulfilling lives. As we continue to build our framework, let's move on to anti-ageism. When Leading Age adopted our vision, an America freed from ageism, we declared our commitment to the anti-ageism movement, a movement that values the entire spectrum of the lived experience, including living with dementia. We don't assume that all older adults are frail or living with dementia, but we don't diminish those who are frail or living with dementia. Dr. Robert Butler coined the term ageism in the late 1960s. As you can imagine, he was influenced by other social movements of the time. Ageism is stereotyping and discrimination on the basis of a person's age. Because we do live in a youth-focused culture, older adults are often the recipients of age-based discrimination. There are a wide range of manifestations of ageism, both individual, like avoiding older adults, or institutional, like housing and employment practices. When thinking about ageism, it's important to understand that anyone of any age group can experience ageism. This is particularly relevant in settings like ours that include a wide range of ages, starting with the 18-year-olds who might be working in the dining room, all the way to the 103-year-olds living in the community or accessing services. Negative comments and stereotypes about millennials are just as ageist as the phrase, "okay, boomer." As you all can imagine, the intersection of ableism and ageism is powerfully intertwined and particularly relevant when we think about living with dementia. Ableism is discrimination or prejudice against individuals with disabilities. With this lens, we might think of policies and practices and messaging. As an organization, is the entire spectrum of ability embraced? And for our purposes today, that particularly includes folks living with dementia. Many advocates believe that people with dementia, believe that dementia should be seen as a disability rather than a disease. If I think of dementia as an illness, for example, I might focus my attention on the medical aspects of the condition and how its symptoms can be fixed with medication. I might see people with dementia as patients on the road to inevitable decline and diminishment. With a shift toward a disability model, we think about human rights and empowerment, about the Americans with Disabilities Act and the International Human Rights Treaty known as the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This information and framing of dementia as a disability helps us to see the people living with dementia and how they have hopes and dreams, skills and talents, and the desire to keep learning and growing. This framing also reminds us to consider what modifications we can make in the environment and to support people with dementia. As I've heard Al Powers ask, what are the cognitive ramps we need to design for people living with dementia? Intersectionality is the last lens I want to explore. For Merriam-Webster, intersectionality is the complex, cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, and classism, combine, overlap, or intersect, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals or groups. And this takes us right back to those social determinants of health that Megan mentioned in the introduction. So for the purposes of this conversation, understanding the fact that each individual has intersecting identities and therefore experiences compounding types of oppression. So the lived experience of a Black woman living with dementia is different from the lived experience of a white gay man living with dementia. At the heart of person-directed care is the call to truly know the people with whom we work. If we understand each individual story, then we better understand the types of discrimination they encounter and how that might be impacting the way they're experiencing the world today. This is particularly important for someone who is living with dementia and may not be able to express that in their own way. Those lenses lead us here. In the overlapping space, I see an approach to dementia that is inclusive, that centers the lived experience, and hopefully challenges us to think differently. To that end, there's a movement building that focuses on reframing the way we think about dementia. That shifting narrative will impact the way we all think about our work and might inform the way families are thinking about caring for their loved ones. This is a Washington Post article from last February, Changing the Tragedy Narrative, Why a Growing Camp is Promoting a More Joyful Approach to Alzheimer's. From McKnight's, A New Dementia Care Imperative. And from the AMA Journal of Ethics, Transcending the Tragedy Discourse of Dementia, an ethical imperative for promoting selfhood, meaningful relationships, and well-being. I'm going to share a quote with you from that article. In this paper, we first show that the negative impact of the tragedy discourse can be readily understood by listening to people living with dementia talk about their experiences, and by considering how they are commonly characterized in the public sphere. We then show that care partners can promote well-being through including and engaging persons living with dementia in decision-making. As our CEO, Katie Sloan, recently said to me, when a person living with dementia speaks to a group of providers, they sit up and take notice, maybe even change their point of view. With that in mind, I'd like to share some quotes from the experts, those living with dementia. The face of dementia is changing. Folks living with dementia, particularly those diagnosed with younger onset dementia, are becoming vocal advocates. And the aging services field is starting to acknowledge that these folks are a wealth of insight on how best to meet the needs of people living with dementia. Here's a recent quote from Michael Ellenbogen, an advocate living with dementia. The people who are trying to create the different activities and policies, they don't include the people with dementia. They just want to give you the voice, but they don't want to listen. Here's Brian Van Buren, another advocate living with dementia, who says, don't say anything, just listen. Listen to my thoughts, concerns, and funny stories. Listen to my hopes and fears. Listen to how this diagnosis has affected me for worse and for better. Keep listening and keep sharing stories. Brian often talks about the experience of being a Black gay man living with dementia, which speaks to the idea of intersectionality that I mentioned a few minutes ago. This is Kate Swaffer. She was named the 2017 Person of the Year in Australia. She's a very active advocate and writer. I encourage you to check out her blog, Creating Life with Words. She says, I refuse to be defined by what I cannot do, but instead by what I can still do. And here's Miriam Marquez. She's also an active advocate, both with living with dementia, and she's busy with the Dementia Action Alliance and the Alzheimer's Association. Her quote encapsulates person-centeredness and underscores the idea of seeing dementia as a disability. She says, we desperately need others to see our abilities and not simply focus on our inabilities. Please enable us, don't further disable us. With all this in mind, I want to shift slightly towards some examples that are intended to provide fertile ground for your own thinking. I've intentionally rounded up a range of examples. Some might be replicable for you, others might not, but all are intended to spark new ideas. I encourage you to think about how shifting your thinking about dementia Asking people with dementia what they want or trying something different might impact your day-to-day. We'll start with an example from Japan. The Restaurant of Mistaken Orders is a restaurant where the servers are all living with dementia. From their website, you may think it's crazy, a restaurant that can't even get your order right. All of our servers are people living with dementia. They may or may not get your order right. However, rest assured that even if your order is mistaken, everything on our menu is delicious and one of a kind. This we guarantee. It's okay if my order was wrong, it tastes good anyway. We hope this feeling of openness and understanding will spread across Japan and through the world. So my question to you is, what roles do people with dementia already play within your organization, and what new roles could they take on? Here's Clark Retirement Community in Michigan, and they partnered with Jennifer Brush of Brush Development to adopt a Montessori approach in their assisted living community. Montessori, which many of you may know from education for young children, but for Montessori for people with dementia, it's a philosophy of life that creates an environment that empowers older adults. The environment is visually organized and supports individual and group programming. The team members at Clark learn as much as possible about the abilities, the needs, and the preferences of residents, and then they collaborate with them to help them achieve joyful engagement in life. Notice the name tag that Fred is wearing in this image and the sign cueing folks to arrange the flowers. These are examples of Montessori style badges and signs. They are simple and they are readable. And I see that some of you use Montessori, which is wonderful. I encourage you to explore Jennifer Brush's website, brushdevelopment.com, where you'll find things like tips for making signs, and I'll share this from her website. She explains cognitive mapping is our ability to visualize where we are in a certain space. It allows us to park, go into a store and find our car again, or find the bathroom at night without turning on the lights. People living with dementia have impaired cognitive mapping skills, so they look for cues in the environment to help them find their way. A cue is something that tells us what to expect. It gives us information that triggers the right pattern of behavior. For example, a table set with a placemat, utensils, and a napkin is a cue that lets us know a meal is about to happen. Signs can also be cues. So how does the environment within your organization support folks living with dementia? Are signs clear? Do they offer clues for independent engagement? Here's Abe's Garden in Nashville, Tennessee. Abe's Garden is a newer not-for-profit provider. They are focused on applied research and have a strategic alliance with Vanderbilt Medical Center, among others. Their person-centered approach is also focused on meeting the needs of families and care partners. They do so by offering programs like an early stage day program and an adult day evening program. What partnerships have you developed with the outside community? Are there new partnerships with nearby educational, arts, or other organizations that haven't yet been explored? Here's an image of Joy's House, another organization that focuses on supporting family care partners. As you all know, families of those living with dementia often struggle with feelings of helplessness and guilt. And for many, it's for their first time walking the path of Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. The Joy's House Care Program is a new effort designed to make life easier for family caregivers. For a modest annual fee, participating caregivers receive a care kit, which is a binder containing a variety of information about their loved one. It includes templates for recording information about medicines or sleep patterns, as well as contact information for other family members or doctors. The program also offers caregiver reunions, support groups, help in evaluating other caregiving options, and more. What types of education and caregiver support do you provide within your organization? How could you grow your family care partner outreach? To Whom I May Concern is a reader's style theater performance and part of an effort to invite those living with cognitive change to educate others about what they're experiencing. This is a picture of members of the Live Well community who are living with dementia. I encourage you to check out To Whom I May Concern. At the heart of the approach is giving people with dementia an opportunity to share their story and raise awareness. In what ways do people with dementia, particularly those in the early stages of the disease, have the opportunity to share their wisdom within your organization and beyond? I Won't Grow Up was a community building arts project that reimagined the story of Peter Pan in collaboration with elders, staff, family, and volunteers in long-term care settings. Time Slips collaborated with 12 rural signature healthcare nursing homes across the state of Kentucky. A year of training and creative exploration culminated in 3 professionally produced original plays in 3 nursing homes in the spring of 2019. This is an example of, as Ann Bastings likes to describe, pouring the arts into the water. Ann is the founder of Time Slips, and if you aren't already familiar with Time Slips, an improvisational storytelling technique designed for people with dementia, I encourage you to check out timeslips.org. I suspect some of you already facilitate Time Slips within your communities. How could you use the arts on both large and small scales to start building connections within your community? Yes, I see. We love Time Slips, and I agree. So this is a picture of folks participating in Joyful Connections, a social drop-in club for JCHE Brighton Center in the Boston area. The program is designed for people with memory loss and their care partners. The program engages residents 4 times per week in a structured 2-hour agenda that many say has changed their lives. The program focuses on imagination and creativity. I've included this example from an affordable housing community for a couple reasons. First, as you all likely know very well, people living with dementia are in every setting, at home, in nursing homes, in affordable housing, etc. Second, the culture change movement began as a movement to change nursing homes, but the values apply to all settings, and all settings find themselves butting up against institutional restrictions and regulations. One participant said of this program, "I'm always happy when there are people around me and I like to be here," which reminds me of how many of us described home at the beginning of this presentation. Hebrew Home at Riverdale by River Spring Health embodies person-centered care in a number of ways, but I'll share just one example with you. They made waves in 1995 when they created the nation's first sexual expression policy. They have a belief that consensual, intimate relationships among residents should be celebrated and encouraged, not forbidden or frowned upon. In addition, they recognize that such policies were needed to address and protect the gray areas of consent with varying degrees of dementia. This is actually an image from the organization's art collection. So how does your organization acknowledge sex and sexuality as an important part of an individual's well-being, regardless of age or cognitive ability? Here are some images from Carol Woods. It's a Life Plan community in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They take an inclusive approach to person-centered dementia care and don't segregate individuals with dementia into a separate memory care. When a resident first arrives, the person becomes a part of the total community and they're welcomed into resident life. They remain an integral part of the community no matter what challenges they may face as they age. Carol Wood CEO Pat Sprigg often asks, at what point in history has segregation ever worked? Carol Woods is one of an increasing number of organizations that is striving to create inclusive environments for everyone, including individuals living with dementia, and seeing the issue of segregation through a civil rights lens. If people living with dementia within your organization live in a segregated environment, what are the ways you can connect them with the greater community? More often than not, when you ask people living with dementia whether they someday want to live in a locked memory care, they say things like Mary Beth Winton once said to me, "I don't agree with segregation. I think we might have to take a few steps before it's out of the way, but segregation and community don't go together." Now, before we wrap up, I'd be remiss on a linked senior webinar to not mention the ways technology is being utilized in a person-centered setting. This is just one of a host of examples, but from a May 2019 Science Daily article, virtual reality technology could vastly improve the quality of life for people with dementia by helping to recall past memories, reduce aggression, and improve interactions with care partners, new research has discovered. VR is being increasingly used as both a life enrichment offering and for staff training. In wrapping up, the factors that influence recent changes in long-term care settings are quite intermeshed. The culture change movement started in the 80s and picked up significant momentum in the mid-90s. About that same time, the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities sponsored a micro-conference on aging, which is said to mark the beginning of the dialogue on arts and aging. Simultaneously, the idea of active aging was emerging. The concept of active aging has been modified by aging services providers to encompass holistic wellness for all people, not just younger elders who are living independently. Culture change, wellness, and the arts have all significantly influenced each other and the current landscape of life enrichment in long-term care. As you know, the United States is now in the midst of a huge demographic shift. In 2011, the first baby boomers turned 65 years old. While each generation of elders has brought new strengths, preferences, and expectations, the sheer number of baby boomers will dramatically change our field. Already, long-term care providers have noticed the younger elders often expect a higher level of involvement within the organization than previous generations. And as I just described, that's also true for people living with dementia. We can't predict exactly how the influx of baby boomers will influence long-term care, but it's likely that boomers will continue to value health, physical activity, personal gratification through vocation, and independence. There's increasing advocacy by people with dementia. Organizations like the Dementia Action Alliance, whose work is guided by an advisory council of individuals living with dementia, are emphasizing the importance of the lived experience in all decision-making. Activists and bloggers like Kate Swaffer, who I mentioned earlier, constantly remind those of us working in the field that the words "nothing about us without us" should apply to people living with dementia. And a national movement called Dementia Friendly America is striving to create communities where all people can live, age, and thrive by catalyzing a national movement to foster dementia friendliness, starting at a community level. Finally, as I mentioned in my introduction, this is all happening against a backdrop of a growing anti-ageism movement, a movement that is working to change the way we all think about aging. Imagine if our children grow up seeing aging as a gift rather than something to be feared. On that note, I want to encourage you to check out Leading Age's website and resources. Here's a recent article from leadingage.org and more resources for you. You can look in a number of different places for our dementia-related content and resources. And yes, you can go to leadingage.org to learn more. Let's shift gears towards your questions and comments. While you're typing your questions in the chat box, I received one question in advance of the webinar. So here it is. One struggle I've noticed as a caregiver myself, as well as among caregivers we work with, is the tendency to either overestimate or underestimate the person living with dementia and their abilities. We are piloting a volunteer tailored activity program with Dr. Laura Gitlin at Drexel University, in which an occupational therapist conducts an assessment and provides an activity prescription based on their interests, background, and abilities of the person with dementia. So the question is, how do we know the abilities of the person when they're unable to accurately self-report? This is a big question, and I suspect a lot of you have really useful responses. So I'll just share that there are a range of different types of assessments, many of which I'm sure you all are already familiar. I think an important caveat is that, like all of us, people with dementia have good days and bad days. So an activity that may have been a good fit yesterday might not work today or tomorrow. And that's why being prepared to improvise and modify is always so important. I did, however, just come across information about a 3-year grant-funded project in Ohio that utilized Reality Comprehensive Clock Test, and that's RCCT, and dementia education. The RCCT predicts the cognitive status of individuals who are experiencing memory loss. And you can check out a recent McKnight's article entitled "It's Time for This Phenomenal New Dementia Care Approach" to learn more about that. Are there other questions?
Kirsten, we do have a question about your email, so I thought maybe if we could advance just one slide so folks can see that.
Yes, absolutely.
And then from Debbie, we have, in my path of becoming a certified trainer, coach, and consultant, I intend to become an independent professional. I've not found courses in specific marketing methods for entering the field. Any thoughts on that?
That's a great question. It's interesting. The marketing piece kind of throws me, but I will suggest checking out the Leading Age Learning Hub, where we have some really good kind of fundamental information and resources, classes, free information for leading age members, and also information available for folks to purchase. That's really good foundational information for folks entering the field.
Perfect. And a question, you had mentioned Dr. Al Power earlier in your presentation, and I was wondering for folks who might not be familiar with his work, if you could talk a little bit about what he's done in the field and maybe how he's influenced your own work.
Yes, absolutely. I am a huge fan. I'm staring at his 2 books, Dementia Beyond Drugs and Dementia Beyond Disease, from my desk here. So Al Powers is a geriatrician who now is really an advocate and educator and writer. I know that he's working on another book as we speak, but a lot of his work is about looking at holistic well-being for people living with dementia. And currently he's focusing a lot on this issue of segregation and integration, how to create inclusive environments for people living with dementia. So he has a website. He also blogs very regularly on changing aging. So that's a place to look for his stuff. And as I mentioned, Dementia Beyond Drugs and Dementia Beyond Disease are 2 books worth checking out. And I certainly think his approach of looking at the whole person and the fundamental values of person-centeredness are really influential in the way I think about my work. And certainly as we look towards talking more about the issue of segregation. So yes, as Kim says, he focuses on well-being.
Excellent. And Kirsten, as we look at 2020 and thinking about a new decade of resident engagement, are there initiatives or projects coming up in the new year and beyond that that you're excited about when it comes to the work that you're doing with Leading Age that you'd want to share today?
That's a really great question. We focus on dementia in a lot of different ways, and as the previous slide sort of referenced, you can find education related to dementia at our in-person events, and there's a growing body of resources on the Leading Age Learning Hub that are really accessible sort of wherever you are. So continuing to build those resources is always really energizing and exciting, and I think connecting people like you all to each other is always something that gives me sort of hope for what's happening in the field and allowing people to grow and continue to learn in new directions. So absolutely a treat to continue to work with advocates also in the field. So we have a lot of relationships with folks living with dementia and are always seeking ways to make connections between providers and people living with dementia.
Perfect. And also, I know that there are state affiliates for Leading Age all across the country, so if folks wanted to attend a local conference in their own state or even the national conference, are there specific tracks about dementia and educational sessions on the topic that those affiliates have and that happens at the national event?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Yeah, absolutely. Leading Age has a whole education track at our national annual meeting. Will be in San Antonio in the fall. So there's a whole education track on living well with dementia. So that's the national meeting. And then our states do offer lots of individual education, both virtual education and then in-person education. And I know, as all of you know, sort of regardless of where people live, people are living with dementia. So all provider types are trying to figure out the best ways to support folks living with dementia. So you can find great education on a state level. And Kim McCrae is also mentioning Dementia Action Alliance, as I mentioned as well, which is always a great resource too.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat box, although I did see folks asking if they would receive the PowerPoint deck from today, and the answer is yes. I will be making sure everyone who attended today receives a PDF document of the slide deck. And also, we're going to be providing the recording today, so keep a look on your inbox for that. Kirsten, I did just want to say thank you so much for your time today. I think everyone on the call learned a great deal. And for those that are looking to talk to Kirsten in the future, her phone number and email address are, of course, on this slide. I do want to spend a couple minutes now just wrapping up today's discussion. Again, here is Kirsten's contact information and Charles as CEO and co-founder of Link Senior, if you'd like to get in touch with Charles. In the chat box right now, I'm putting our post-webinar survey evaluation link. For those that need CEU credit, or even if you don't but would like to provide feedback on your thoughts from today's webinar, please do fill that out. For those who aren't familiar, Link Senior does have an Old People Are Cool campaign that we've been running for several years now. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to www.oldpeopleare.cool. We also have a Facebook page and a Twitter account for those who want to follow us. And as I mentioned in the beginning of today's discussion, we have webinars already lined up for 2020. So here is a list so that you can save the date. Registration is live for the January 14th webinar. And that's the webinar with Charles. He's going to talk about the state of resident engagement. And then we have the webinars listed through July, actually, of next year. We do still have a couple of openings remaining, so please do email me if you have an idea for a speaker. And I see a question here in the chat box. What is the Old People Are Cool location? It's www.oldpeopleare.cool if you want to learn more about that. And another question here, will you be sending the CEUs an email? Yes, you will get your CEU certificate. That will happen on Monday by email. It's Monday, December 23rd. And again, please check your spam folder. Sometimes that email will land in the spam folder. I'm going to paste in that post-survey evaluation link again, and you'll be receiving it through a constant contact email message in the next 30 minutes. So take a look at your spam folder. So with that, Kirsten, thank you again so much for your time, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. I'm going to go ahead and leave the webinar room open for those that still need the survey, and we hope to see you in January. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you.